I welcome everyone and anyone who ever listens to this video. Now, if you read the title, it might seem odd that we speak about something noble and at the same time suffering. So, in order to make it work and in order to make sense, I will start with something that we must have heard so many times in our lives, and we have to see what does that reflect on. And the thing that I'm speaking about is the statement that life is suffering. Now, those who are with me can confirm that they might have heard it and they might have also said it. And we have to reflect on what we mean by such statements as life is suffering, or how people mean this better said. Please.
Yes, we have heard this and we have experienced this. Thank you.
And what does that mean? If you could.
Meaning that we have experienced suffering in our life. And we kept wondering, why is there so much suffering? Can't we have an end to it? Where's the end? You know, and you'd maybe go to this school or you'd achieve this or achieve that. And still, there was no spot to rest here. None. And we kept looking. And even when we found a spot to rest on, it wouldn't remain. It would not remain. It would go. And it's like, what is going on here? So, yes.
Suffering. Okay. So, there are two types of people, two types of beings, better said, that may say this. Those who want a lot, those who are attached, because once your attachment, the object to which you are attached is gone, there is suffering. So the moment there is some attachment to something, life is suffering. And even those who detach themselves from particular things or all things may as well just say that life is suffering. But the difference is that if let's say a noble one, what is a noble one? Anyone who has eradicated certain feathers is a noble one, because they must have seen in order to give up feathers, that there is suffering and that life is just a mess of suffering and nothing else. And then when such a being says that life is suffering, it comes from the understanding that I do create it in a way, and that the only way out of it, the only shelter, is if I uproot it. If I don't, then I will never find peace. And those who actually, see it out of suffering, out of attachment, they think that most of the time the answer is that, yeah, life is suffering, but there are good times and bad times. And because there are good times, the bad times aren't that bad anymore. But the bad times are the same bad. It is just that, again, it's a mental formation, a conceptual thinking that somehow two different moments equalize each other. Because if you say that one moment is bad in your life, another one is good, and then you say that they equalize each other, it means that those two moments should have any correlation with each other. But do they have any correlation between each other? Like what happened a day ago and what is going on now? Do they have anything in common?
No.
So there is no way that they in any way correlate or function according to each other. So unwholesome moments, which are painful, are the same way unwholesome, no matter how many wholesome things there are. And if there is something unwholesome, it means that we ourselves hold the root, hold the seed of that unwholesomeness. So instead of trying, and this is very important, instead of trying to make it up or try to polish it and behave as if it were nothing, one has to, again, speaking of mindfulness, realize that it was wholesome, unwholesome, and investigate its seed. Where does it come from? For example, if there is aversion, there is great anger, one has to see, okay, this is anger, and it doesn't matter how well I feel other times. Right now, it is the reality I'm sitting in. And then once realizing this, weakens that anger, and working on it, understanding its roots and why it's suffering, one will put an end to it, for example. So only like the true factuality of suffering, in what truly means that there is suffering, is understood by someone who has done insight. Because why is there no, for example, landing spot, no safe spot, no hope, and no hope in an objective, factual saying that as just like I'm heartbroken and I don't know how to express that, is that everything rises and falls because everything is impermanent. And once you put your hopes in something, in a shelter, in a refuge, you will just find a landing spot which is the same way impermanent. Had you ever found the true landing spot, you wouldn't have suffered ever again. But can you say that? Even an enlightened being, his body or her body may still, suffer like physical pain. So even then, when they have, uprooted all ignorance in themselves, still there is pain in the physical realm from the body. But they, of course, know this, but they don't try to fight it or find a shelter, because they just observe such physical pains as well as mere physical pains and nothing more. So any shelter that we will find will at some point collapse, and this is why there is no shelter. And to say it out with understanding that there are no hopes in the world, whatever you put your faith in will slowly arrive to its demise, and then we are again without a house to stand in that sense of a refuge, and then we just wander in the world trying to find a refuge. But again, it's a concept that we try to find refuge, because those seeds that then implode and then make us suffer come with us. So no matter what shelter you try to find, the seeds are there. So wherever you go, they go with you. So there is why there is no shelter. And speaking of the Four Noble Truths, that there is suffering, there is a reason to suffering, an origin, there is an end to suffering, and that there is a way to the end of suffering. For example, this factuality of there is suffering, many times we might think that it's something that we know. Of course, we know that there is suffering, but do we know it to the extent that even to see that no matter where you look, what you do, your six senses, so the five physical plus the mental door, they're always pushed. There's always object. Something always comes to your experience. This is, in a way, how you can see that there is great suffering as a noble fact, that no matter what you do, there is pressure on your senses, because you cannot wake up without seeing, you cannot wake up without hearing, smelling, tasting, and wherever you move, there is an object awaiting you, and it's a pitfall as long as there is attachment, because once you see an object, if there is no mindfulness right now, you will love it, hate it, and it keeps going. So there is always a pitfall like a snake in every object, if there is no mindfulness, and if there are feathers, such as, for example, identity view. As long as there is an identity view in a being, no matter how hard, if they try hard in the sense of insight, then it's good. But if they don't bother with it, then what happens is that whatever object they will see, they will, in a way, identify, oh, this is, we might say this is my dog and this is my this or that, but we don't really mean it as my possession or that it's related to me. It is just conventional that we say these things. So, for example, a stream enterer will not identify with, oh, this is my bloodline, because having arrived to equanimity about all these types of formations as body, feeling, and such, because there is no identification, whatever object might come, they will not fall into the trap of identifying or with concepts, which is the bigger thing, like nation, race. These are concepts. And then they would not identify with it. So they have put an end to a great amount of greed and a great amount of ignorance as well, because they see the suffering in identification. And then it's true for any type of feather. And when you see the true danger of it, and when you finally get rid of it, then the novelty, so to say, rises in the being. They have an even deeper understanding of how all these objects and all their pressure on the senses is just like a snake, like a robbery, like murderers coming to you and taking away your peace. So this is why it's noble to see the ways of suffering and to uproot them. And now you might ask, okay, but why is it still noble suffering? Well, it's not about nirvana being suffering, of course. There is this great saying, great teaching that Bodhidharma came up with. Well, in fact, he just expressed the Dharma, so it is just that this is the way he expressed it. He said that we might think that enlightened beings liberate mortals, but in fact, mortals liberate enlightened beings. Now, it might be truly puzzling. How can he mean that? Like, why would mortals liberate enlightened beings? And in order to understand this, we have to see that what he means by mortals is greed, hatred, delusion. So the three types of poisons that beings come and go in between. So mortality means greed, hatred, delusion. No matter if one is a type of god in a jhana world or in a hell realm, as long as there is greed, hatred, and delusion, one is mortal. And then there are, non-mortals in the sense of having uprooted greed, hatred, delusion. Well, we mean arahants, any type of being who has eradicated the 10 feathers. So all greed, hate, delusion. And the factuality is that had they not been in the three poisons of greed, hate, and delusion, so in the realm of suffering, they wouldn't have become, free from these. And why is it so? Because in order to turn away from the mundane, from the trivial, one has to see, for example, suffering. So because we have spoken about this before, that there are three characteristics to all things. Well, we said that all things are impermanent because, just look, outside your window and see that the wind blows. So for sure, everything is impermanent. And then because everything is impermanent, once one is attached to an impermanent thing, there is suffering. And because all things are impermanent, it means that whatever essence you might nominalize, like, this is that essence of that object, once a moment passes, it's a different object because it's impermanent. So it cannot have a core. And that is the third characteristic, that things are selfless, coreless, essenceless, call it as you wish. And so in order for a being to completely, eradicate all greed, hatred, and delusion, they have to see the suffering in it. Else, if we were in a passive state of suffering, could we even think about getting rid of it?
No.
No, we would just be like, well, animals would be the best example. We would just, have a continuous existence, like a life, and then things would come, things would go, that we wouldn't truly understand that there is suffering. Even as human beings, we might not see throughout why there is suffering. But as long as one can observe the factuality of suffering, one may, put the seed of wanting to get beyond it in their, mind. And that is why it's very important, because if we couldn't see that there is suffering, there wouldn't be any nobility, arising in the world. And because of this mortal pain, this mortal poison of suffering, greed, hatred, and delusion, which is, we can say it's suffering. It is that one can liberate. So this is why it is said that mortals liberate enlightened beings, because without their own mortality, they couldn't overcome it. And because they saw suffering, they became noble ones by understanding and eradicating those seeds of suffering, the 10 feathers, namely. So this is the big difference between those who say that life is suffering and they are melancholic, and enlightened, like any type of enlightened being, stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, or arahant, they are not melancholic ones. When they say that life is suffering, it is a factuality objective. It's not that they claim it like theirs, like my suffering, my life. In the opposite way, they just realize that there is simply suffering going on, and that you cannot help it, because as long as there are beings born in the worlds, there will be suffering for those beings. So even when great beings were born and before they became enlightened, they also had suffering going on in their lives. And then they got this push to finally go and realize something greater than that. So this is why we call this video Noble Suffering, to see that also we have already discussed this, that samsara and nirvana are neither different nor the same. The link will be in the description. And that is because you couldn't realize the end of suffering if you couldn't see the factuality and its origin, obviously. So, noble ones, arahants don't experience suffering anymore, but they very much know about the nature of suffering because they themselves have wandered in the field of sufferings for long times. So they know about it, and any other one, stream enter, once returner, non-returner, there is still amounts of suffering for them too. Well, of course, every one of them has a lesser and a lesser degree, but suffering is suffering. It doesn't matter how much or how few. It is just that one will have more fortunate births if one uproots more of their own ignorance. But ignorance is ignorance, and suffering is still suffering. And it's best if we don't try to make it small suffering and big suffering. We don't want to be partial. We want to see if there's suffering, then there's suffering, no matter how big or small or intermediate level of that is. So this was about this topic. And if there is anything that anyone who is present with me today would like to add, please. And if not, then thank you very much for listening, and hear you in another video.
Oh, Krishna. What about others that maybe you get into a state where you're not suffering, but others try to inflict suffering upon you, and sometimes it's hard to avoid others. And so, how do you go about that when you find others trying to cause suffering for you? How do you block that?
Okay, so we can, in this case, when others do harm to us, it can be either physical or mental, and I believe that you referred to both of them, correct? Physically and mentally trying to.
That's correct.
Okay, so let's start with the physical one. That might be. Let's start with the mental one. That will also answer part of the physical. So when, let's say, somebody becomes harsh or rude or such things, now first you have to understand, and this is very crucial, we experience all these things because of our six senses. If there is no hearable object, namely a sound, is there hearing going on? Or if there is no visible object, is there sight happening? This is a question for those who are here. If there are no objects of that respective sense organ, does the actual any cognition happen?
No.
No. So if there is no taste, then I cannot have tasting. If there is no smell, then even though I have a nose, I will not sense anything with that. And it happens for all the objects of the senses. So we have to understand that, and of course, this comes with mindfulness and insight. And this is almost all the answer. That if you put enough insight to see that being there made some noise, because that is just sound, and I, by a cognitive process, I took it in and analyzed it, and only then I had suffering. That there was a coming together of the sounds of the ear, and when those two touch each other, there is the, so to say, the ear consciousness, that you were aware of a particular sound going on. And then you have to see truly that this triad of coming together is a momentary happening, a momentary experience. Okay, you might hear it for several moments, but all moments just rise and fall, and where they fall, they vanish. And if you could only see it as sounds coming in, touch coming in. If let's say that somebody hits you, that there was a touch, and you could simply just recognize the ongoing process. Oh, I saw something which, okay, might have been unpleasant, but you make it unpleasant. This is our reaction, that something is pleasant or unpleasant. As we have discussed it previously, everything in the five senses, excluding the mind, is in fact the experience of atoms in some way, because obviously visible data is a bunch of atoms. Taste, smell, these are also atoms in one way or another way. Touch is when atoms touch these atoms, and ultimately when you hear something, that is also just the scattering of atoms, the sound wave that moves through the atoms, through the air. So if you can simply see it as the movement of atoms, because that is all our five senses do, they try to recognize atoms in one way or another way. So to just see that this is all just materiality is what I'm, to simply boil it to the bottom line of it, there is just materiality that we experience through the five senses. And ultimately, the five senses are only, materiality is only atoms. Okay, they sometimes characterized as like the hardness of things, so the earth element, the heat of it as a fire element, the pressure of it as the air, and the viscosity of it is the water. But we don't even have to do that. Even more simplified is that materiality is just atoms in their different qualities and quantities, but that's it. And then when there is mindfulness, you have to understand that whenever we like or dislike something, it doesn't come from the object. Liking and disliking comes from the mind, not from, like, objects are neither pleasant nor unpleasant, because atoms are neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It is just that we might have some previous perception of certain objects, and then it's our memory that we evoke, and then we experience this or that, but like pleasant or unpleasant, but that only comes from us. A sound is neither pleasant nor unpleasant because we make up the meaning. Say somebody means something very rude, but let's say that they say it in a way that it's not evident. If you make it up as pleasant, then you will not suffer out of it. If you make something, let's say somebody says, "Oh, how nice of a dress you have," and you think that they wanted to pick on you, they will suffer, but not because they really meant it, but just because you made it up as like that. So you see, the reality of pleasant and unpleasant comes out of what we make it to be. It's not that things by themselves. It's very important because we speak about corelessness. It means that things in themselves cannot be pleasant or unpleasant, because on what basis is it so? Because they are relative to those, giving the meaning to them. You cannot speak about absolute pleasant and absolute unpleasant, like in the sense sphere. Therefore, this is how you have to just contemplate that the consciousness of the five senses is just a recognition of certain atoms, and that's it. And whenever somebody says something rude or pleasant, doesn't matter, you just realize sounds, pleasant, unpleasant, whatever you feel, just say the feeling. Oh, it's pleasant, it's unpleasant. So you don't try to make it more than what it is, and don't make it less either. So it's pleasant, unpleasant, period. There is no continuation of, but why did he say that? Why did I not do that differently? No, this is all just making up. These are already concepts. Factuality is feeling what was experienced, and that's it, the object. These are factualities that happen. The rest we make up. And then you just contemplate that there was a recognition of sounds. And then you don't suffer because of it, because why would I suffer because the wind blows? That is also just a noise. And we hear just noises. This is very important. Even the most perfect music ever created is also just a noise, only that we make it up as pleasant. And we're of course expected to make it up as pleasant, but a mindful person doesn't take delight in sounds, because for sure you know that sounds are also impermanent. I mean, now here's this sound, and there is no more sound. So they are not frozen in time the moment they are, spoken out. So we just make up the meaning of noises, and most of the time we suffer in, from the five senses. That those ones from which we suffer most is our hearing and our sight, because those things that we don't like come mostly here. Because touch, it doesn't really, because we touch things that we like, so whatever. Smell and taste, normally we don't eat food that we don't like, so smell and taste will not be unpleasant. But what we see and what we hear are those things that, here you can see that things don't have a soul, because you cannot direct whether you hear that thing or not hear that thing. If it happens that you heard it, That's it. There is no overlord to hearing. It is a mere appearance of the heard or of that of the seen. So just simply see that these noises happen in the whole creation, and if you just recognize them as noises, you will not make it as pleasant or unpleasant. You will simply become neutral with them. I have no business with them. So if we look at insight, for example, rise and fall, you start with that, but at the ultimate point you say, this is hearing, not me, not mine. I am nobody's belonging anywhere, anytime, nor is there anything belonging to me from anyone, anywhere, anytime. And if you can, simply just look at all these appearances as not me, not mine, not my belonging, nothing to do with me. It's there, and there is no correlation between the two. Then you are equanimous towards that. And the next step would be, of course, to even eradicate any type of attachment to that. But you have to see, again, that there is, in fact, what correlation is there between a noise and this body? In the ultimate sense, there is no correlation. They don't have anything in common, so to say. If we speak about, let's say, arrogance, which also comes into this question. Arrogance, when somebody believes that they are superior to somebody else, the question is, what is even the correlation between that being and the other one towards which it feels superior? There is no correlation. There are just two forms completely devoid of any mutual connection. There is nothing there. Things are just by themselves. If you look in your kitchen or in your room where you are, you just see that there are certain objects. There is a knife, there is a fork, but they just sit there. They are completely empty. They don't have any action. They're simply there sitting, and the same goes for our body. Atoms simply there sitting, no action, completely devoid of any core. They just sit there. And it happens when there's conceit, one doesn't see clearly, and conceit happens in your question, especially from those who try to make our life harder, so to say, that they believe that there's any correlation. I am a being and so are you, so I have the right to say anything to you, whatever I wish. But there is no correlation. There are 10 billion sounds going on right now on Earth, or even more. I just said a number, like infinitely many sounds going on. Why would you be so particular to take that one, which was supposedly directed to you? What is that you towards which it was directed? It was directed to air, and that is all its only direction, because then it, in air it will move in certain different directions as well. Why wouldn't you pick up the car that goes on, or why wouldn't you pick up the air that blows? But you pick up that which you feel that is directed to you. But you have to see that there are no things directed to you, because there is no core. This is just atoms. And the physical, when somebody wants to do it physically, let's say somebody hits you, physical pain can be there, but nobody said that you have to have mental pain, namely aversion. You can just simply realize, okay, there was pain, period. For example, there are great stories about arahants or any enlightened being who, they were murdered, or they were they had a very bad headache, and they said that indeed they experienced that headache or that murder, or maybe they didn't die right away, but they died after, and they had some unpleasantness in the body, so they had physical pain, but because there was perfect mindfulness, they just saw it as pain, not me, not mine. Because if there is no attachment to experience, then pain, pleasant, painful, not painful, these are just appearances. impulses, and that not me, not mine, never ever me, mine. So they just saw it as pain. Here is pain, and this is how you get free. Many people want to flee their burdens, so to say, but there is no fleeing. If it comes, let it come. It's your karma, but be mindful about it. And it's pain. It's pain. So be it. And you don't make it yourself, or you don't make it belonging to yourself, and you have nothing to do with the impulsions of the body, because those are just atoms, and atoms are in rest. So why are you not? If this answered the question.
Yes, that helped a lot. So thank you, Krishna. Not me, not me, not mine.
Not me, not mine. Correct. If there's anything that anyone would like to ask, then please come forth. If there's nothing else to be discussed, then thank you for listening, and hear you in another video.